Meanwhile, a tumult of half-forgotten, youthful sensations rose once more in my breast. The religion that had breathed around me in my cradle, the teaching of a time distant and dimly remembered, as if it had formed part of some previous life, awoke and claimed its disciple. I recalled gentle old men who loved children and flowers, and whose tender patience overcame my childish timidity. I remembered how they would take me on their knees, and with failing voices, the tones of which linger in my hearing after 40 years, would tell me things like some strange fairy tale, but even more marvelous, for they had seen and taken part in the wonders of their story. And if I seemed to doubt, they would take my little fingers in their maimed hands and make me touch the scars left by a ball or lance or sword. The infinite patience of the strong plied them with never-ending questions about him whose marble face, pale and superb, rose above us in the hall like that of a god above his altars. They told what he had done and suffered, how he had lived. They spoke of battles, victories, apotheosis of conquered capitals and liberated peoples, of armies swimming across icy rivers, of Cossacks carried off and cast at his feet, of levies raised spontaneously by the magic of his name, of duels, combats about his memory, and we wept together, they, his old soldiers, and I, a little child. Sacred are those tears which I have seen flowing on proud faces, seamed with scars, when after some such burst of speech the iron veterans would sit silent a while, with lips compressed, so pale that their wives, rising, would rebuke them tenderly. You should not talk of these things. It is bad for you. To which they would answer, it is right that the child should hear. Those tears falling on my brow were my baptism, a baptism to which I am still faithful. That infant faith of mine may have slumbered for many years. On that memorable day, it awoke and mastered my whole being. I too witnessed things strange and terrible, such as my old friends had told me. A treacherous faction striking down the elect of the people and giving up their fatherland to the invader. I saw joy which made me think of the joy of noble ladies kissing the lips of Cossacks. I saw the human brute let loose against the vanquished while urging it on, goading its frenzy and directing its attack. I saw the men as of old, with the passions and appetites, and with them others like unto them, the children of our own century, our governors of yesterday, our governors of today. From that day forward, I neither reasoned nor doubted. I acted. An unknown volunteer, I served the Emperor Napoleon III, a nameless soldier. I served the Prince Imperial. Later, I held the post assigned to me in my brigade and obeyed orders for which I may claim some credit, seeing that at the time the Napoleonic party was, to my mind, diverging lamentably from its true precedence and its rightful goal. But I had faith in the future. The young leader had the virtues proper to a Napoleon: faith, courage, sincerity. He would have understood and accomplished his mission. He disappeared, and chance brought me into contact with Prince Napoleon. He honored me with a confidence unsolicited on my part and deigned to call me his friend. In his will, my name occurs immediately after those of his own family. He called upon me to vindicate his memory, and if I have not yet accomplished the task, it's through no fault of mine. I feel that an impassable gulf now separates me from those in whose ranks I once fought. We have not a thought, not a hope left in common. My place is among the dead. I have finished with conflict, and the opinions I cherish are purely historical. All that remains to me of activity, of energy, of faculty for work, I desire to dedicate to the study of him whom I look upon as our Savior in the past, and whose tradition now distorted and forsaken might have been our salvation in the present. For the last 20 years, I have been endeavoring to form an idea of him, and everything I have read has proved to me more and more conclusively that the history of Napoleon has yet to be written. Going back to the root of the matter, I have tried to consider him apart from the deeds he accomplished and the events he brought to pass as legislator, as diplomatist, as financier, as administrator. His figure is a great and attractive one, but it is not that of the man himself. Before we can form any just idea of the man, must we not see how his brain worked, how each minute of his time was spent, what proportion of it he bestowed on pleasure, how far he was influenced by the senses, the passions, the affections, what part he played as son, as lover, as husband, as father? At the present distance of time, it is necessary, in order to reconstruct the man, to inquire carefully into his daily life and to invoke all available testimony. This it has been my endeavor to do. I have collected round me all I could find that shows him as he was, that speaks of, or that emanated from him, manuscripts, books, pamphlets, newspapers, drawings, engravings, busts, statues. In this task I have found many powerful allies and have received many flattering marks of confidence. I had no intention of publishing my notes. I felt my own limitations too deeply to aspire to be the biography of Napoleon. But the endless scribblers who have furnished more or less apocryphal accounts have at last forced me to break silence, were it only in the cause of truth. So it has come to pass that I have distilled the essence of documents that have been accumulating for years, consisting of notes gleaned from state or private archives, from books, newspapers, and pamphlets. All I had seen, read, or heard that seemed to me of some value as evidence. The result is a narrative of the facts as they appear to me from these various evidences. Neither in this volume nor in those that may follow it shall I reveal my sources of information, many to whom I owe valuable documents exacted a secrecy which debars me from any public expression of my gratitude, as I cannot name them. It seems to me better to name no one. Neither do I care to draw attention to certain items taken from private papers in my possession. Such references often serve no other purpose but to gratify the vanity of the writer, besides which such displays of erudition calculated to dazzle a certain section of the public are by no means proof of good faith. Several authors whose attacks upon Napoleon have been recently printed bristle with references to authorities. In each case where I have verified these references, I have found them to be false. For my own part, I have given my best work to my task. I am convinced of the authenticity of the documents I have used, and am ready to prove my offering my portfolios for inspection, but I neither care nor intend to convince any who doubt my good faith. As is the historian, so is the history. Hitherto I have been accounted an honorable man, and such I claim to be. The circulation of these articles has been very considerable, yet I have only received 2 corrections. As to matters of fact, once referred to a date, the other to the name of a place. I therefore venture to think that had more serious errors crept in, they would have been pointed out to me. I am far, however, from supposing that my work is absolutely free from mistakes or omissions, and in laying these collected essays before the public, I cordially invite communications from any who may have information to give or documents to make public. As to the spirit in which these studies have been produced, I have heard it said that I have lowered the reputation of my hero and belittled the man I sought to magnify. This may be the result of a minute analysis and precise detail of my narrative to show the emperor as he was. It was necessary not to chant his glory in the sonorous periods of the poet, but to examine the more intimate habits and functions of his personality. To this end, no circumvolution of his brain was without interest, no motive of his actions insignificant, no fact in his life without its bearing, nor any individual of his circle altogether unimportant. My long preparation was for other purposes than the drawing up of a declamatory apology or unsupported generalization, my inquiry is rigorous as that of a judge, bound to neglect no element of his case. In the following pages, this inquiry turns upon the feelings and affections. Later, it will be occupied with the emperor's domestic life and with certain periods in Napoleon's career, in dealing with which I feel qualified to bring out his character, his modes of thoughts and actions. Will the final result justify my endeavors? I have every confidence that it will, but if I falsified evidence to give a favorable turn to the inquiry, if I fail to allow due weight to every fact that presents itself, I should fail in my duty and forfeit my claims to belief. Are there any who wish to see Napoleon painted other than as a man, who conceive of him as having lived without the daily development of his nature, who think of him as the same in 1769 as in 1821, who admit of no modifications between his apparition in France as the young scholar of Autun and his death at St. Helena after having dominated nations and swayed the destinies of Europe? Would they have had him pass from the cradle to the grave guiltless of an indiscretion superior to impulse, untouched by experience? Would they have had him so far above the rest of humanity as never to have shared its passions, felt its emotions, nor yielded to its governing instincts? Were these things true of him, he would have been no man, but a god, one of those supernatural beings created by the imagination of a people whose first lispings proclaim truths divine as those of his maturest utterances, who have neither childhood, youth, nor maturity, seeing that throughout their early passage they are but the instruments of a divine mission. But if we take it that Napoleon was a man like other men, though of exceptional intellectual gifts, it is evident that his ideas and the actions these ideas suggested were not classified and regulated for him by a special providence from his birth. They were his own, and not the promptings of a god, the product of his brain, and not the effect of external influences. He himself was not the predestined instrument, the germ of which, passing spotless and incorruptible through a long line of elect beings, is transmitted from generation to generation, from sex to sex, bearing in that atom which is to become its brain the fate of nations. He was a being who retained, no doubt, some confused impressions of previous atavism, but whose mind was formed by education, instructed by history, who gleaned some new idea from every fresh experience, whose gradual evolution may be followed, his passing sensations observed, a being in whom his fellow man can recognize a brother, for he shared the emotions common to mankind at large, and therefore it is essential to note Napoleon's relations with women. Nature has associated with the special function of the male animal the propagation of species, a host of sensations which govern and subjugate him, which determine his course, and to which the majority of his actions are subordinated. In the case of man, these sensations are active and even violent. They inspire a large proportion of his sentiments and ideas, and occasion or determine the liveliest manifestations of his character. Even when the man in question is Napoleon, and woman plays a comparatively mediocre part in his life, it is essential to see what sort of woman attracted him, what were his relations with her, and what the feelings, physical or moral, she inspired in him, to inquire which of his actions were attributable to woman's influence, and how far his thoughts and ideas were modified by the beauty and conversation of women in daily intercourse. He who embarks on an inquiry of this nature, of course, lays himself open to the charge of mere scandal mongering. The lists I have drawn up, the evidences I have collected, the details I have accumulated will no doubt shock the modesty of Tartuffe's, who, fresh from an attempt on Elmire's virtue, exhort Doreen to cover up her breast. They are being so ethereal and spotless that they can brook no allusion to the process without which all animated nature would perish. A process which, if in itself unvarying and consequently interesting, is capable of infinite variety in its preliminaries and its consequences, which exhibit its man in his most diverse aspects, which explains and annotates his life, revealing its secrets and strengthening its foundation of this process. We must needs take cognizance, for without it preliminaries and consequences would be alike unmeaning. Yet strange to say, it is held to be indecent to allude to it in connection with historical personages, although it is avowedly the text of all conversation, the chief interest of all social gatherings, the attraction of every ball, the nucleus of every play, the theme of every novel, the basis of family life, the tie that binds society together. History, nevertheless, must be expurgated, as if its public were recruited solely in the young ladies' schools. The writer of history alone is forbidden to show that one of the strongest motives of human action is the desire to find favor with woman. He alone is expected to ignore that love, or what passes for such, has been the root of most of those events which have shaped the destinies of the human race. This form of hypocrisy I will willingly leave to others. A candid account of some liaison of Napoleon's throws more light on his character, to my mind, than the history of a campaign or a treaty. What we desire to know is the man himself, his soul, his heart, his mind, and it will hardly be contended that such knowledge is complete if we ignore his attitude towards women and the part they played in his life. The contemporary novelist is permitted, in deference to the exigencies of a thesis which invariably deals with sexual passion, to analyze every amorous sensation, moral or physical, of his imaginary hero. The public applauds his inventions. Women wax hysterical in admiration. Drawing rooms and academies combine in ecstatic eulogy. The psychology of such books is certainly interesting, but it is purely fictitious, built up on hearsay, or based on confidences or episodic observation. Nevertheless, it is accepted as a science. It receives official recognition, and soon, no doubt, it will be taught from professorial chairs in the Sorbonne, just as it is already expounded and demonstrated in society. But dare to inquire how a man who holds perhaps the supreme place in history understood, judged, and loved women, basing your inquiry on letters, admissions, and conversations of the man himself, on a wide variety of evidences, and on every part of information that affords material for the reconstruction of his career. Approach your subject never so frankly, liberally, and chastely, eschewing all coarseness of expression, all superfluous details, and you will be branded as one of those pornographic scribblers whom all serious students despise. So be it. I honor the incomparable man to whom I would fain see altars raised by his countrymen after my own fashion. I am convinced that the more deeply one studies his history, the greater is one's admiration for him, that one cannot do his memory greater service than by making known the facts of his life, that my present contribution to such knowledge, indispensable to the appreciation of his moral being, will have its value to the sincere and unbiased section of the public, and looking for no reward, aspiring to no place, seeking no suffrages, I go my way. Frederic Masson.